An unending forest and swamp surrounded by a web of rivers and moose. This is how one can describe Polesia for the most part. This natural wilderness is amazing in its diversity and life flourishes contrary to everything else. Here is where bold and treacherous wild game and their prey live. They are armed with the most incredible finesse in order to adapt and survive during severe winters and in periods of dry summer. The history of nature in this region is a fight against time and survival of the fittest in nature. The most frightening predator, mankind, laid claim to this land. However, nature did not give up its untouched primeval status as the Wild Polissya of Ukraine. Polesia lies in a massive tract of wet lowlands that extends for hundreds of kilometers and encompasses the territories of several countries at once. Polesia stretches across the northern parts of Ukraine, over more than 1,000 kilometers from Poland to Russia. A part of these natural tracts of land became a reserve. Here the Bryansk forests, swamps, the floodplains of the Desna river and lakes are picturesque even in the winter. The Desnyansky-Starohutsky National Nature Reserve Park lies in the northernmost part of Ukraine, where traits of a taiga environment are inherent. The snow-covered forest creates the impression of fairy tale. Massive, heavy snowcaps lie on the tops of evergreen trees, and only rare gusts of wind that blow through the headstrong trunks rid their limbs of the unbearable burden of heavy snow. To the start of December, small tributaries of the Desna River freeze over, and its valleys are buried in an icy slumber. Exactly in this period, one can encounter the most unexpected animals, for example, minks. They are skittish but very friendly animals. This is a new encounter. Throughout my entire practice of 12 years, we did not have such an opportunity to see this and register it. Even if the water is not accessible, this animal will not die of hunger. Aside from fish, in its ration there are small rodents, rabbits, and even muskrats. Nature itself made a mink an ideal hunter. It can eat any rodent that is smaller in size, both on the river banks and in the water. For an inhabitant of the Polesia forest, even snow is a tough test. Due to it, these animals must find food in fairly harsh conditions. They should not expend their energy in vain. Moose have to get around tree bark and thin tree branches. Due to harsh winters, this massive animal can lose a fifth of its weight. Meanwhile, a standard woodpecker lives through the winter quite well, particularly if the tree bark becomes brittle. This bird can easily find small yet very nutritious maggots. Smaller birds also acclimatized to periods of hunger. The winter forest seems to be serene and deserted, but one can hear and be amazed by the sounds of chirping birds. This is not like some spring trills, rather more than a signal of danger or a call to fly out to find a meal. Without mutual assistance, they cannot survive a harsh winter. Leaving the autumn fruits on trees is a savior from hunger for these small winged creatures. But while a human being can take care of them, winter will not help these birds at all. Grits, blue tits, and nuthatch as silage and feeding grounds are tasty for these birds. Especially thrifty nuthatch lay aside all that is edible diligently, tucking it under tree bark with their beaks. Whether they find their stash later on is unknown, but the survival instinct will work even for small birds. This winter way of life exists here since the times that the forest appeared, though very few such old and natural nooks remain. For example, that which turned out to be unsuitable for farming. The Boromlya tract is a unique forest world. The old ash oak forest is surrounded by picturesque lakes. They extend like a long chain of lakes that fluidly transition from one another. When all this is covered with snow and the water mills are iced over, they can be recognized by their strips of trees or shrubbery surrounding the shores. There is a massive forest situated in the Boromlya tract with the same name. In essence, that is what was left of those forests that once upon a time covered practically the entire tract of the same river.
Ще за часів Київської Русі почали ліси в заплаві.
Still back in the times of Kievan Rus, these forests were felled and were turned into meadowlands. Only a small part of them was preserved in its current form with its natural forest vegetation.
Сейму залишилася вкрита природною рослинністю.
Going deep into the thick of the wild forest, you are even more convinced of its age. One cannot immediately notice beyond the tree trunks that there is where the emperor of the forest resides. Having made its heavy and mighty body, nature made sure that the trees would not be noticeable. The flattened forms of the bodies of animals are easily hidden in the undergrowth of the trees. As far back as the 6th to 7th centuries, such an encounter would not amaze anybody. Then this massive herbivore animal had a strong impact on the formation of the forest. Feeding mainly on tree leaves in huge quantities, bison made the forest much thinner, thus giving it more sunlight.
Зубри на території
For already 500 years, bison have not had an essential impact on the growth of vegetation. Their number has significantly decreased. This animal became quite rare way back in the times of Kievan Rus.
їх чисельність значно скоротилася, і це вже став рідкісним цей звір.
Today, these rare animals cannot be counted on one hand. In Ukraine, the number of bison barely reaches 300, and although encountering them is quite unique, the majestic and mighty emperor of the forest still takes first place among these animals. Notwithstanding, all inhabitants are equals when it comes to surviving the harsh winters. They must patiently wait until these unique places wake up and their lives will be revived. Up to the end of March, the sun in Polesia will gain sufficient strength to melt the snowy elements of winter. When the ice melts, the icy waters will again flow into the Desna, 4,000 kilometers to the Black Sea. It flows into the valleys along the surrounding banks of rivers and revives everything around. The tributary of the great Dnipro River quickly regains its natural water supply. Here the water was never subjugated to humans, particularly in floods, as it is a free element of nature. These waters inundate all under their force, and the spring meadows turn into a massive lake on their shores. Then later, the river will be enriched with fish, and motley meadow grass will grow on the banks of the river. The Desna River, just as in the olden days, remains a river that feeds humans and is a source of life for plants and animals. Be that as it may, not all manage to survive these natural hardships. Insects that end up underwater will hardly survive, but those that manage to survive will continue their life cycle and bring benefits to the forest. Ants that wake up one after another under the rays of the summer sun. The body of ants contains a substance that allows them to slow down all the processes of vital activity during the period of winter cold. So the time of awakening for ants is directly associated with the coming of warmth. This hurry-scurry species of insects revives and gradually become inexhaustible builders. In nature, everything is harmonious. One insect sows plants, while the other is ready for pollination. As soon as the snow melts, Under rare canopies of the forest flowers bloom and blanket the fringes of the forest with a beautiful multicolored carpet. The crests, anemones, and goose onions that surround the berry trees that give off sweet scents that attract a brilliant palette of bumblebees and flies.
Ліс, який начебто повинно жити.
In essence, in this climatic zone, the forest should revive at the beginning of summer, but thanks to the primroses, the breathing of life here can be felt much earlier.
Гусячих цибуляк, інших видів гемероїдів, вони прикрашають і лісову систему.
Revival also gains on the Desnansky tract, and a colony of wading birds finds its comfortable home in the weeds. Water ducks, geese, and sandpipers gracefully splash in the shallow waters of the river. Naturally, predators are constantly flying over the river seeking their catch of the day. This place is a true winter paradise for our feathered friends. For most of these birds, this is a temporary rest between flights to their place of nesting. For many inhabitants of the forest, the early spring air is a love trap. Frogs send signals to their mates for breeding. As a rule, every species of frogs or toads croak in their own way. But this individual sound, one can identify the species of the frog. They mate and put aside the eggs only in water, just the same way that fish spawn their roe. By the end of summer, the progeny of frogs and toads undergoes a metamorphosis before the tailless offspring become adults. In any case, amphibians should always be on the alert. Some predators simply ignore their distinct and even frightening odor that reminds one of their disgusting palate. For example, a stork on the hunt for frogs. However, a clove of garlic will most likely not lure the stork to an easy catch. Sensing the danger, it digs into the ground. Special horny tubercles on its paws allow a frog to quickly disappear from sight, and the long-legged predator flies away without a catch. A floodplain is the native home for the most graceful local inhabitant, namely the white stork. A spring smorgasbord with frogs and fish allows birds to regenerate the energy they lost during their flight from distant African regions, where they spent the winter. As legend has it, storks delivered newborn babies to their happy parents, but here in the Mizinsky Park, their offspring take up most of the space. Storks find a mate for several years, and year after year can return to the same nest. When the offspring are born, the winged nomads get a breath of new life in local villages over several months. Changes in the time of year have an impact on the Mizinsky National Nature Reserve Park. Most of the trees are covered with leaves, and the forest became much darker. The backwater opened up beautiful emerald meadows covered with aromatic fresh grass. From the peak of Mount Puzyreva, one can see scintillating lakes and amazing oxbows with fantastic and bizarre forms. These places intersect with winding mainstream of the ancient Desna River. And as in the past, the shores connect the rope ferries. The primroses are then replaced with perennial summer plants. The slopes of the shores are then seeded with flowers that have the color of azure. Peat moss meadows and small island swamps can be seen on the tracts of land and terraces of the Desna River. Here you can see practically all types of Polesia swampland of different ages, even those from ancient times. Despite the harsh weather conditions, the vegetation in swamps is abundantly growing. At the same time, the swamp is growing alongside this vegetation by 1 millimeter per year. But there's no need to rush. After all, 1 meter of peat moss grows over 1,000 years. Contrary to popular belief, Life assumes its own primitive form, and the swamps of Polissya will very soon change, just like the palette of nature. Green colors will be replaced by bright red and yellow colors, which will gradually turn into a black and white gamut. The rhythm of life of all living creatures is slowing down, but that does not mean that nature will stop amazing us. After all, this world will always be a mystery and a secret. What lies ahead is the most interesting. So come travel with us to discover unexplored Ukraine.